They descended from the stars, an unstoppable force of elite female soldiers from the planet Tarian. Known for their lethal precision and unparalleled beauty, these warriors had been forged in the crucible of countless battles across the galaxy. Clad in sleek, reflective armor that accentuated their formidable presence, they were a vision of power and grace, a sight that struck fear into the hearts of all who opposed them. As the Tarian invasion fleet approached Earth, their mission was clear: to conquer and subjugate the human race, bringing another world under the dominion of their matriarchal empire. On board the flagship, Commander Zara stood at the helm, her icy gaze fixed on the blue planet below. She had led her sisters to victory on a dozen worlds, and Earth would be no different. "Prepare for landing," Zara commanded, her voice calm and commanding. Her soldiers, standing in perfect formation behind her, responded with a unified salute, their expressions as cold and determined as their leaders. The Tarian dropships sliced through Earth's atmosphere like daggers, their descent swift and unrelenting. They touched down in the deserts of New Mexico, the barren landscape serving as the perfect staging ground for their invasion. The humans had tried to resist, but their efforts were futile against the Tarians' superior technology and tactical brilliance. As the doors of the dropships hissed open, the Tarian soldiers emerged, their reflective armor glinting in the harsh sunlight. They moved with military precision, their formation flawless as they secured the area. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were the finest of the Tarian Empire, handpicked for their skill, loyalty, and unwavering dedication to their cause. Commander Zara stepped out of her ship, surveying the landscape with a critical eye. She was a vision of strength, her tall frame clad in the same reflective armor as her troops, her face set in a mask of steely determination. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her sharp features giving her an air of regal authority. "We will advance on the nearest human settlement," Zara announced, her voice carrying over the sound of the wind sweeping across the desert. "Our objective is to eliminate any resistance and establish a forward base. Move out." Her soldiers responded with a crisp "Yes, Commander," before falling into formation behind her. As they marched across the desert, the ground seemed to tremble under the weight of their presence. The Tarians were an unstoppable force, and nothing on Earth could stand in their way, or so they thought. Unbeknownst to the Tarians, Earth's military leaders had anticipated their arrival. In a secure underground bunker, far from the chaos above, a small group of the world's most cunning strategists and tacticians had gathered. They had seen the Tarians advance, had studied their tactics, and had devised a plan that, while unconventional, might just be their only hope. Commander Scott, a veteran of many battles and known for his unorthodox methods, stood at the center of the room. His rugged features were set in a grim expression as he addressed the assembled officers. "These Tarians are not just soldiers," Scott began, his voice low and intense. "They're trained to dominate, to crush any resistance with both force and psychological warfare. But they've underestimated us. They don't know who they're dealing with." The other officers listened intently, knowing that Scott's reputation for thinking outside the box was their best chance at survival. He had faced impossible odds before and come out on top, and they were counting on him to do it again. Scott turned to the holographic display, showing the Tarian soldiers advancing across the desert. "They rely on their discipline, their unshakable confidence. We're going to exploit that. We've put together a team, an elite unit of men who are not just skilled in combat, but in persuasion, in seduction. Their mission is to infiltrate the Tarian ranks, to turn their strength against them." There were murmurs of surprise and skepticism from the other officers, but Scott silenced them with a raised hand. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's our best shot. These women are warriors, but they're still women. They're not immune to charm, to the power of attraction. If we can get inside their heads, we can break them from within." The room fell silent as the gravity of Scott's plan sank in. It was risky, unorthodox, and unlike anything they had ever attempted before. But as the image of the Tarian soldiers loomed large on the screen, their sleek armor and cold expressions a reminder of the formidable enemy they faced, there was a sense of determination among the men. This was their planet, their home, and they would do whatever it took to protect it. Scott turned to his team, a group of hand-picked operatives who had been trained not just in combat, but in the art of seduction. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice filled with resolve, "it's time to show these Tarians what Earth's finest are made of." Under the cover of night, Commander Scott and his team made their move. Allowing themselves to be captured by the Tarians, they were taken aboard the flagship, exactly as planned. The Tarians, confident in their superiority, had no idea that they were playing directly into Scott's hands. The Tarian flagship was a marvel of alien engineering, its corridors sleek and pristine, with an otherworldly glow emanating from the walls. Scott and his men were led through the ship, their hands bound, but their spirits unbroken. They exchanged subtle nods, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. They were brought before Commander Zara, who eyed them with cold curiosity. She stood at the center of the room, flanked by her most trusted officers, formidable women who exuded power and authority. "You will tell us everything we need to know about Earth's defenses," Zara demanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Scott met her gaze with a smirk, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Resistance. I thought we were just getting to know each other." Zara's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "You think this is a game, human. You are nothing more than a means to an end." Scott leaned back, his demeanor relaxed despite the tension in the room. "Well, if that's how you see it, but I'd prefer to think of it as a partnership. After all, we're not so different, you and I." Zara's gaze flickered with something. Was it intrigue? Scott couldn't be sure, but he pressed on, using every ounce of his charm and wit to keep her off balance. He knew that if he could get inside her head, he could plant the seeds of doubt, of curiosity, and maybe even desire. The other men followed Scott's lead, engaging the Tarian officers in conversation, their words laced with subtle flirtation and innuendo. They were playing a dangerous game, but they were playing it well. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. What had started as a tense interrogation had transformed into a charged exchange of words and glances. The Tarian soldiers, who had been so sure of themselves, were now facing something they hadn't anticipated. A battle of wills, of hearts. Days turned into weeks, and the interactions between the human captives and their Tarian captors grew more complex. What had started as a mission of seduction had become something more, something that neither side had expected. Commander Zara found herself drawn to Scott in a way that confused and unsettled her. He was unlike any man she had ever encountered, confident, clever, and utterly unafraid of her. His words, his presence, stirred something within her that she couldn't ignore. In the quiet moments, away from the prying eyes of her officers, Zara would summon Scott to her quarters under the guise of further questioning. But these sessions were different. They spoke of more than just tactics and battle plans. They spoke of their worlds, their lives, and the choices that had led them to this point. "I've never met anyone like you," Zara admitted one night, her voice soft and contemplative as they stood by the large viewport, the stars stretching out before them. Scott chuckled, his tone teasing but sincere. "Well, I could say the same about you. But then again, you Tarians are full of surprises." Zara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You make me question everything I've ever known, everything I've been taught to believe." Scott turned to face her, his gaze intense. "Then maybe it's time to start believing in something new, something better." The tension between them was palpable, but it wasn't the tension of enemies. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had anticipated when this war had begun. But outside their private world, the battle still raged. The Tarian High Command was growing impatient, demanding results, demanding that Earth be brought to heel. And as the pressure mounted, Zara knew that she was running out of time. Her loyalty to her people, Her duty to her mission clashed with the growing connection she felt with Scott. It was a conflict of the heart, one that threatened to tear her apart. And as the day of reckoning drew closer, Zara knew that she would have to make a choice, one that would determine the fate of not just herself, but her entire race. The tension aboard the Tarian flagship reached a breaking point as whispers of dissent began to spread among the soldiers. Scott and his team had done their work well, sowing seeds of doubt and rebellion within the ranks. The Tarians, once united in their mission, were now divided, some still loyal to the cause, others questioning their purpose. Zara could feel the cracks forming, but she was torn. Her heart was conflicted, caught between her duty and the growing feelings she harbored for Scott. She had always been a leader, a warrior, but now she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. One night, unable to bear the weight of her turmoil any longer, Zara summoned Scott to her quarters. She needed to talk to him, to hear his voice, to find some clarity in the storm that raged within her. When Scott arrived, he found Zara standing by the viewport, her expression troubled. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, his voice gentle. Zara didn't turn to face him. "I'm supposed to be leading an invasion, crushing your people under our heel, but all I can think about is you." Scott moved closer, his hand gently touching her arm. "Zara, you don't have to do this. You don't have to follow orders you don't believe in." Zara finally turned to him, her eyes filled with conflict. "And what would you have me do, Scott? Abandon my people? Betray everything I've ever stood for?" Scott held her gaze, his expression earnest. "No, I'd have you fight for something real, something that's worth fighting for. We don't have to be enemies, Zara. We can find another way." Zara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was a way out of this nightmare. But she knew that it wouldn't be easy. The Tarian High Command would not take kindly to rebellion, and if she chose to side with Scott, she would be putting everything on the line. But as she stood there, looking into Scott's eyes, Zara realized that she had already made her choice. She couldn't continue down this path of destruction, couldn't continue to lead her people into a war that would only end in tragedy. Taking a deep breath, Zara made her decision. "We'll need a plan," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "A way to break free from the High Command's control." Scott smiled, relief and hope flooding through him. "I knew you'd come around. And don't worry, I've already got a few ideas." As the two of them began to plot their next move, Zara felt a sense of determination she hadn't felt in a long time. She was still a warrior, still a leader, but now she was fighting for something more than just conquest. She was fighting for a future that she and Scott would create together. The plan was in motion. Zara and Scott, now allies in a fight against a common enemy, worked tirelessly to rally the Tarian soldiers who had begun to question their mission. It wasn't easy. Loyalty to the Empire was deeply ingrained, but the seeds of doubt had been sown, and they were starting to take root. As the Tarian High Command prepared to launch their final assault on Earth, Zara and Scott knew that time was running out. They had to act quickly, or all would be lost. The day of the battle dawned with an eerie stillness. The Tarian flagship hovered above Earth, its weapons primed and ready to strike. But inside the ship, a different battle was brewing. Zara stood on the bridge, flanked by Scott and the loyalists who had joined their cause. They were vastly outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise on their side. "We need to take out the command center," Zara said, her voice calm but resolute. "If we can disable their communications, we can prevent them from coordinating the attack." Scott nodded, his expression determined. "And then we'll take the fight to them. We'll show them that this isn't a war they can win." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. As they moved through the ship, Zara and Scott led their team with precision and skill, taking down any resistance they encountered. Finally, they reached the command center. The door slid open, revealing the high-ranking officers of the Tarian Empire, their faces masks of cold fury. "Traitor," one of them hissed, her hand going for her weapon. But Zara was faster. She disarmed the officer with a swift strike, her movements fluid and deadly. "This ends now," she said, her voice filled with conviction. The battle that followed was intense and chaotic. Energy blasts lit up the room as Zara and her team fought to take control of the ship. Scott was at her side, his every move calculated and precise. They fought with everything they had, their desperation driving them forward. They knew that if they failed, Earth would fall, and all they had fought for would be lost. But Zara and Scott were a formidable team, and their determination paid off. One by one, the officers fell, until only Zara and Scott were left standing. With the command center secured, Zara moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm disabling their weapons," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to end this once and for all." As the ship's systems powered down, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The Tarian soldiers who had been loyal to the high command now looked to Zara for guidance, their loyalty shifting to the one who had proven herself a true leader. Scott stepped up beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Zara looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "No," she said softly. "We did it." With the Tarian flagship under their control and the high command defeated, the threat to Earth was finally over. The Tarian soldiers who had survived the battle now stood united under Zara's leadership, no longer invaders but allies. As the ship hovered above Earth, Zara addressed her people, her voice carrying through the ship's intercom. "We came here as conquerors, but we leave as something more. We have a chance to build a new future, one where we are not defined by war and conquest, but by cooperation and understanding. Let us take this opportunity to start anew." Her words were met with silence at first, but then, slowly, the Tarian soldiers began to nod in agreement. They had seen enough bloodshed, enough destruction. It was time for something different. Scott stood beside Zara as she spoke, his heart swelling with pride. He had never imagined that this war would end like this, but now, as he looked at the woman who had once been his enemy, he realized that they had done something truly remarkable. As the Tarian ship descended towards Earth, the first steps towards a new alliance were being taken. The humans, once fearful of the invaders, now looked to them as potential partners in rebuilding their world. Zara and Scott, united by their shared struggle, stood at the forefront of this new beginning. They had fought not just for survival, but for a future where their people could live in peace. And as they looked out over the horizon, where the sun was setting on a world that had been forever changed, they knew that their journey was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, guided by the lessons they had learned and the bond they had forged in the heat of battle. The war was over, but the story of Zara and Scott was far from finished.